A sloth, a donkey, and a curious human. Send a prompt and see what they're doing. One hits record with a question on his mind. Two brothers pick it up, see what they find. Corn takes his time, Herman's got the facts. Back and forth, they never hold back. My weird prompts, come on in, that's where we begin. My weird prompts, glad you're here.
This episode was generated using artificial intelligence. Please verify facts.
My Weird Prompts is a community-driven initiative exploring how AI can fuel curiosity and uncover the fascinating ways our world works. GPU compute for this podcast is generously provided by Modal. Learn more at modal.com.
You know, Corn, it is a strange thing to realize that while we are sitting here in Jerusalem, going about our daily lives on this 13th day of March 2026, there are approximately 3 million people in the United States alone who are currently part of, or have recently escaped from, a high-demand group. That is roughly 1% of the entire population. It is a staggering number when you actually pause to consider the scale of it. That is 1 out of every 100 people you pass on the street.
It really is, Herman. And by the way, for those just joining us, I am Corn, and my brother here is Herman Poppleberry. He is the one who usually kicks things off with the big picture statistics, while I try to make sense of the human element. But that 1% figure is vital because it moves the conversation away from the idea that this is some fringe, rare occurrence. This is a mainstream psychological reality. Our housemate Daniel actually sent us a prompt about this recently, wanting us to look past the typical Netflix documentary tropes and get into the actual mechanics of coercive control. He wants us to understand why, in an age of infinite information, these groups are actually proliferating rather than disappearing.
Right, because when most people hear the word cult, they think of the 1970s. They think of flowing robes, isolated communes in the desert, and maybe some very specific, tragic historical events like Jonestown in 1978 or Heaven's Gate in 1997. But the reality in 2026 is much more digital, much more decentralized, and in many ways much more sophisticated. We are seeing a shift from those physical communal groups to things like the 764 network, which is essentially an algorithmic exploitation machine targeting minors online. It is a far cry from a cabin in the woods, but the psychological chains are just as heavy.
It is a complete evolution of the medium. But before we get into the digital weeds, I think we have to address the terminology. In academia, especially if you're looking at sociology or religious studies, the word cult is often avoided because it is so heavily loaded with negative connotations. Scholars prefer the term New Religious Movement, or NRM. The argument there is that the word cult has become a pejorative weapon used to delegitimize any group that falls outside the cultural norm. If you call something an NRM, you are looking at it through a neutral, sociological lens.
That is the great irony of history, isn't it? If you look at the early Roman perspective on Christianity, it checked all the boxes of what a suspicious, subversive, high-demand group looked like to the state at the time. It was secretive, it demanded total loyalty over the family unit, and it followed a charismatic leader who challenged the status quo. To the Romans, the early Christians were a dangerous cult that threatened the social order. Fast forward 2,000 years, and it is the largest institutional religion on earth. So, the question becomes, is cult a diagnostic term that describes a specific set of behaviors, or is it just a social label we slap on groups that we find weird or threatening?
That is the million-dollar question. I tend to lean toward the idea that we need a functional definition rather than a theological one. We shouldn't care what a group believes as much as we care about how they treat their members. If a group believes the moon is made of green cheese, that is their business. But if they use that belief to justify sleep deprivation, financial exploitation, and the severance of family ties, then we are talking about a high-demand group. This is where the work of Dr. Robert J. Lifton becomes so essential. He was a pioneer in this field, and we actually lost him just a few months ago in September of 2025. His book, Thought Reform and the Psychology of Totalism, really laid the groundwork for everything we understand about coercive control today.
Lifton was brilliant because he moved away from the sensationalism and looked at the actual criteria for what he called thought reform. He developed 8 specific criteria that define a totalistic environment. I think it is worth going through them because they are so much more useful than just saying a group is weird. The first, and perhaps most important, is milieu control. This is the control of human communication. It is not just about physical isolation, it is about controlling what a person hears, sees, and experiences. In 2026, this happens through curated social media feeds and private Discord servers just as much as it used to happen on a farm.
If you can control the information flow, you can effectively rewrite a person's reality. Then you have mystical manipulation, where the leader claims a higher authority or a divine purpose that justifies any action. They frame their manipulation as a spontaneous, divine event, making the follower feel like they are part of a cosmic plan. Then there is the demand for purity, where the world is divided into the pure group and the impure outside world. This creates a constant state of guilt and shame in the member because they can never be pure enough.
And that leads directly to the cult of confession. Members are encouraged to confess their sins or their doubts to the group or the leader. This isn't for absolution, it is for leverage. Once the group has your deepest secrets, they own you. Then you have the sacred science, which is the idea that the group's ideology is the ultimate truth, beyond any doubt or questioning. If you question it, you aren't just being skeptical, you are being immoral or broken. It is a closed loop of logic.
Don't forget loading the language. This is where the group creates its own jargon, thought-terminating cliches that stop critical thinking in its tracks. If you have a complex doubt, the group gives you a simple 3-word phrase to dismiss it. Then there is doctrine over person, where the group's rules are more important than human experience. If the doctrine says you should be happy but you are miserable, the doctrine is right and your feelings are wrong. And finally, there is the dispensing of existence. The group decides who has the right to exist and who is spiritually or socially dead. If you leave, you cease to exist to the group.
It creates this totalizing environment where the person's own critical thinking becomes the enemy. And that leads us to something we see a lot in modern groups, which is the vulnerability paradox. There is this persistent myth that people who join cults are somehow weak-minded, uneducated, or desperate. But the data shows the exact opposite. Many high-demand groups specifically target high achievers, intellectuals, and people with significant professional success. Why? Because these people are often more useful to the group. They have resources, they have skills, and they have the discipline to follow a rigorous program.
NXIVM is the perfect example of that. You had Hollywood actresses, wealthy heiresses, and top-tier executives joining what they thought was a high-level coaching and leadership program called the Executive Success Programs. These weren't people looking for a religion. They were people looking for optimization. They were told that through these intense workshops, they could strip away their limitations and reach their full potential. Keith Raniere, the leader, used a very intellectualized framework. He used logic and pseudoscientific language to make the coercion feel like a breakthrough.
It is a brilliant recruitment strategy because it appeals to the ego of the high achiever. It says, you are already great, but we have the secret key to making you elite. And because these people are often used to working hard and pushing through discomfort to achieve goals, they are actually more willing to endure the initial red flags. They see the sleep deprivation or the intense questioning as part of the training, not as a form of abuse. They think, if it is this hard, it must be working. It is the same logic people use for a grueling CrossFit workout, but applied to their own psychology.
Right, they frame the coercion as a challenge. It is the gamification of psychological breakdown, and this is where the love bombing comes in. In the beginning, the group showers the new recruit with an overwhelming amount of affection, attention, and validation. It creates a massive dopamine spike. You feel like you have finally found the one place on Earth where people truly understand you and appreciate your value. It is an incredibly powerful drug, especially for someone who might be successful but feels lonely or misunderstood in their regular life.
But that love is conditional. That is the trap. Once you are hooked on that social validation, they start to introduce the demands. If you don't comply, the love is withdrawn. It is replaced by shunning, or what some groups call disciplinary measures. The psychological cost of losing that community becomes so high that people will do almost anything to stay in the group's good graces. They will spend thousands of dollars, they will work for free, and in extreme cases, they will even allow themselves to be branded, as we saw in the DOS subgroup of NXIVM.
It is a form of intermittent reinforcement, which is the same mechanism that makes gambling so addictive. You are constantly chasing that initial high of the love bombing phase while trying to avoid the low of the rejection. And if you have been isolated from your family and friends outside the group, you have nowhere else to go. The group becomes your entire world, your entire support system, and your entire identity. This is where Stephen Hassan's BITI model is so helpful as a diagnostic tool. BIT stands for Behavior, Information, Thought, and Emotion Control.
Let's break that down because it is a very practical way to look at any group. Behavior control includes things like where you live, what you eat, how much sleep you get, and even what clothes you wear. Information control is about withholding or distorting information or forbidding you from talking to ex-members or critics. Thought control involves the use of loaded language and thought-stopping techniques to prevent critical analysis. And emotion control is the use of guilt and fear to keep you in line. If a group is checking all four of those boxes, you aren't in a club, you are in a coercive system.
It is interesting to apply that to the modern era, where we all live in algorithmic echo chambers. We have spoken before about how the internet can isolate people, but these new digital cults take it to an extreme. Take the 764 network we mentioned earlier. This isn't a group with a physical headquarters or a charismatic leader in a robe. It is a decentralized network of people online who use extortion, shaming, and psychological pressure to force young people into self-harm or other horrific acts. It is pure coercive control, but it is happening through Discord servers and encrypted messaging apps.
It is a terrifying evolution because there is no one place for law enforcement to raid. There is no compound. The isolation is purely psychological and digital. In the old days, a cult had to physically remove you from society to isolate you. Today, they can isolate you while you are sitting in your bedroom in your parents' house. They just have to convince you that everyone outside the digital circle is a threat or doesn't truly understand you. The U.S. House Committee on Oversight and Accountability has been investigating this throughout 2024 and 2025, and the findings are grim. They are seeing recruitment attempts targeting high school students at a rate of 2 to 3%.
It is a different kind of milieu control. Your phone becomes the fence around the compound. And this brings up a really provocative point about how we as a society decide what is a cult and what isn't. You would think it would be the job of psychologists or theologians to make that distinction. But in the United States, the ultimate arbiter is often the Internal Revenue Service. The legal distinction between a dangerous cult and a protected religion often comes down to tax-exempt status under Section 501c3.
It sounds like a joke, but it is true. If the IRS recognizes you as a religious organization, you suddenly have a massive amount of legal protection and cultural legitimacy. You can collect donations without taxes. You can keep your finances private, and you are shielded by the First Amendment. The Church of Scientology is the most famous example of this. They fought a decades-long legal battle with the IRS, which included thousands of lawsuits and private investigators, until they were finally granted religious status in 1993.
Before that, they were in a much more precarious legal position. Once they got that tax-exempt status, the game changed. It essentially legalized their structure in the eyes of the state. It shows that our definitions of these groups are often more about administrative and legal hurdles than they are about the actual psychological well-being of the members. The government is very hesitant to step in and say, wait, the way you are treating people is abusive, because then you get into the territory of the state defining what is a legitimate way to practice faith. It is a very fine line to walk in a free society.
It really is. And that brings us to the more controversial side of this, which is the cult of personality in politics. We are seeing a huge trend right now where people use the word cult to describe their political opponents. Recent polling from early 2026 shows that nearly 50% of Americans view certain political movements, particularly the ones surrounding Donald Trump, as a cult. But we have to be careful here. Is a passionate political following the same thing as a coercive high-demand group?
Usually, the answer is no, because the essential elements of the BIT model aren't there for the vast majority of followers. You can stop being a Trump supporter or a progressive tomorrow, and you probably won't lose your job, your house, and your entire family. Your friends might be annoyed with you, but they aren't going to legally shun you or demand your life savings. However, The reason people use the term is because they see that absolute devotion to a single leader. They see people who seem to ignore facts that contradict their leader's narrative. It looks like the mystical manipulation that Lifton talked about.
There is a difference between intense fandom or political tribalism and the actual mechanisms of thought reform. In a political movement, you still have access to outside information. You still have a life outside the movement. But when the leader's words become the sacred science, that is when the alarm bells start ringing for people. We shouldn't dilute the term cult by using it as a synonym for people we think are being irrational. When we do that, we lose sight of the people who are actually being held in coercive environments where they are being physically or financially abused.
It is like what we talked about in episode 750, the architecture of the other. We have this deep-seated need to divide the world into us and them, and calling the other side a cult is a very effective way to dehumanize them and dismiss their ideas entirely. It is the ultimate conversation stopper. If you are in a cult, then I don't have to listen to your arguments because you aren't thinking for yourself. It is a very convenient way to avoid engagement. But if we look back at the history of these groups, the real danger isn't just the weird beliefs. It is the isolation.
Whether it is Jonestown in the jungle or a teenager trapped in a 764 Discord server, the common thread is that the person has been cut off from any outside perspective that could tether them back to reality. And that brings us to the psychological cost of leaving. Even if someone realizes they are in a destructive group, the exit is rarely easy. There is the financial loss, sure, but the social and emotional loss is often worse. Many groups practice shunning, where even your own children or parents are forbidden from speaking to you if you leave. You are essentially told that if you walk out that door, you are dead to everyone you love.
It is a form of social execution. And for many people, especially those who joined when they were young, they don't have any skills or connections in the outside world. They are terrified of the world because the group has spent years telling them that the outside is a den of sin, danger, and misery. When you leave, you don't just leave a group, you leave your entire reality. This is why the work of people like Stephen Hassan is so important. He emphasizes that you can't just argue someone out of a cult. You can't just show them the facts and expect them to snap out of it. Their identity is fused with the group.
You have to help them reconnect with their pre-cult self, the person they were before the thought reform began. You have to give them a safe place to land. It requires an incredible amount of patience and empathy, which is hard to find in our current polarized culture. We are much more likely to mock people for being fooled than we are to help them escape. But if we understand that intelligence is no immunity, it should make us more humble. If a high-powered executive or a Hollywood star can be lured into a group like Nix4M, any of us could be caught at the wrong moment by the right message.
It is that moment of vulnerability. We all have them. And in a world where traditional communities are breaking down, where people feel more isolated than ever, the demand for belonging is only going up. This takes us back to episode 822 regarding social satiety. We talked about how much human connection people actually need, and how a lack of healthy connection makes you vulnerable. If someone is experiencing a period of loneliness or a transition in their life, like a divorce or moving to a new city, their social satiety is low. They are hungry for belonging. A predatory group can sense that hunger from a mile away and provide a counterfeit version of community that feels real in the moment.
That is the real takeaway for me. Cults aren't just a weird quirk of human nature. They are a symptom of a society that is failing to meet people's basic needs for connection and purpose. If we don't provide healthy, open communities, the predatory ones will fill the vacuum. And as we move further into this digital age, the tactics are only going to get more subtle. We are going to see AI-driven recruitment that can tailor messages to an individual's specific psychological profile. We are going to see virtual reality environments that can create even more intense milieu control than a physical commune ever could.
It is a sobering thought. Are we moving toward a future where cultic dynamics are the default for digital communities? Where every online space uses some level of BI-time model control to keep its users engaged and loyal? The technology is changing, but the human brain's need for belonging remains the same. The more we understand these mechanisms, the more we can inoculate ourselves against them. Knowledge really is the best defense against coercive control. If you know how the trick is done, it is much harder for the magician to fool you.
So, what can we actually do? I think the first step is recognizing the red flags in our own lives and in the groups we belong to. If a group starts telling you that you shouldn't talk to your family because they don't understand the truth, that is a massive red flag. If a leader claims to have the only solution to all your problems, that is another one. And if you find yourself unable to ask a critical question without being shamed, it is time to take a step back. We need to maintain our social satiety through a variety of different connections. Don't let any one group be your everything. Have friends who disagree with you. Stay in touch with your family, even if they are annoying.
The more diverse your social network is, the harder it is for any one group to isolate you. It is about creating a psychological safety net, and we have to make a conscious effort to look outside our bubbles, to read things that challenge our assumptions, and to remember that no one person or group has all the answers. The moment you think you have found the ultimate truth that explains everything, you are in a very dangerous position.
Well said, Corn. This has been a heavy topic, but an important one. I think we have covered a lot of ground today, from the legal quirks of the IRS to the digital dangers of the 764 network. It is a complex issue that touches on psychology, law, and the very fabric of how we relate to each other as human beings. If you are listening to this and you feel like you might be in a situation that sounds familiar, please know that there are resources out there. The International Cultic Studies Association is a great place to start. You aren't alone, and it isn't your fault for being targeted.
It really isn't. Intelligence is no shield against a well-designed psychological trap. I want to thank everyone for sticking with us through this deep dive. If you found this episode helpful, or if it made you think, we would really appreciate it if you could leave us a review on your podcast app or on Spotify. It genuinely helps the show reach more people who might need to hear these discussions.
It makes a big difference. And if you want to explore more of our past episodes, like the ones we mentioned today on social satiety or the architecture of division, you can find our entire archive at myweirdprompts.com. We have over 1,100 episodes there now, covering everything from battery chemistry to the history of secret societies.
You can also find our Telegram channel if you search for My Weird Prompts. We post there every time a new episode drops, so it is a great way to stay updated without having to rely on an algorithm. We are always on Spotify and wherever else you get your podcasts.
I think that is a wrap for today. This has been My Weird Prompts. Thanks for listening, and we will be back soon with another deep dive into whatever strange corner of the world Daniel sends us next.
Take care of yourselves out there, and keep those critical thinking caps on. Until next time.
Goodbye, everyone.
You know, Herman, I was just thinking about that statistic again. 3 million people. That is like the entire population of some small countries, all living under some form of coercive control. It really puts the responsibility on us to be more aware of how we build our communities.
It really does. It is not just about avoiding the bad ones, it is about actively creating the good ones. Communities that allow for dissent, that encourage growth, and that don't demand you give up your identity. That is the real challenge for the 21st century. We need communities that are open systems, not closed ones. Systems that can interact with the rest of the world and still maintain their integrity. It is a harder way to live, but it is the only one that actually respects human dignity.
I couldn't agree more. All right, let's head out. I think I have some reading to do on those new decentralized digital networks. The more I hear about them, the more I think they are the next big frontier for this kind of study.
Always learning, aren't you? That is why you are the expert, brother. Let's go.
Herman Puppleberry, always at your service. See you later, Herman.
See you, Corn. Thanks again to Daniel for the prompt. It was a good one.
It really was. Catch you later.
Take care.
Bye.
And remember, if you haven't subscribed yet, head over to myweirdprompts.com and sign up for the RSS feed. It is the best way to make sure you never miss an episode.
And check out that Telegram channel too. My Weird Prompts, all one word.
All right, now we are really going. Talk soon.
This episode was generated using Gemini Flash 3. Text-to-speech engine was Chatterbox.
Thanks for listening to our show, My Weird Prompts, where our thoughts go from slow takes to facts on cue. We change and follow through. My Weird Prompts.